The fluorescent lights of the Boo 7 research base hummed a monotonous tune, a stark contrast to the vibrant, almost offensively purple vegetation that clung to the jagged mountains outside. Inside, Mark Olson, a man whose social life could best be described as in hibernation, hunched over a holographic display, his brow furrowed in concentration. At 33, he was still considered relatively young, but the stress of decoding alien communication was starting to etch lines around his eyes. "Damn it," he muttered, running a hand through his already disheveled brown hair. Another dead end. The HFY language, with its combination of telepathic undertones and visual cues, was proving to be more stubborn than a mule on a Tuesday. He'd been at it for months, and the only phrase he'd successfully deciphered was something that translated to "shiny rock, must lick." Not exactly groundbreaking stuff. Having trouble with the space birdies again, Mark, came a voice from behind him. Dr. Aries Thorne, the base's resident astrophysicist, leaned against the doorframe, a smirk playing on his lips. He was everything Mark wasn't: outgoing, confident, and annoyingly good-looking. Mark sighed, rotating his chair to face him. "It's not exactly the birdie chatter, Aries. More like telepathic static mixed with a light show. I swear, they communicate with their skin color changes as much as their minds. It's like trying to read a mood ring while someone's playing a disco." Aries chuckled. "Well, maybe you just need a little more hands-on experience. You know, get out there and mingle." He winked, the comment laden with a subtle yet unmistakable double entendre. Mark grimaced. "I think I'll stick to analyzing holographic displays, thank you very much. Besides, they're in the middle of their mating season, which means they are probably even more confusing. I've seen the reports. They get territorial." He shuddered, remembering a particularly unsettling incident where a HFY had attempted to court a research drone by aggressively waving its feather-like sensory organs at it. Territorial or, dare I say, passionate? Aries raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "Come on, Mark, a little passion might do you some good. Maybe they'll teach you a thing or two." Mark groaned, burying his face in his hands. "Please, spare me. I'm about as good at interpersonal relationships with humans, much less aliens who use their skin as mood indicators." He turned back to his work, hoping to end the conversation, but not before muttering, "At least I don't wear Hawaiian shirts in space." The hours ticked by, the hum of the bass lulling him into a state of near sleep. He was so tired that he barely registered when he absent-mindedly shifted in his chair, his hand brushing against the comm panel on his console. A series of random frequencies pulsed out into the ether, a digital burp in the silence of the cosmos. He didn't think anything of it, it was a mistake anyone could have made, except that the frequencies were, in fact, a long-dormant HFY mating signal. Meanwhile, light-years away, a sleek, iridescent ship descended from the star-dusted blackness of space towards Boo 7. Inside, glittering Asbloom, a HFY female with skin that pulsed with shades of vibrant turquoise and emerald, felt a jolt run through her. The mating signal had been received, loud and clear. Her three-fingered hands clenched, her large, expressive eyes glowing with a fiery intensity. This was it. Her soulmate was calling. Back on the base, Mark finally decided to call it a night. He stretched, his back popping in protest, and shuffled towards his living quarters, completely unaware of the cosmic blunder he'd committed. As he reached his room, the emergency alarm blared through the base, the red light strobing intensely. "What in the blazes?" he muttered, hurrying back towards the main lab. He found the usually calm and collected staff in a state of controlled chaos, faces glued to the various monitors. "Mark! Get over here," shouted Dr. Evelyn Reed, the base's head biologist, her face a mixture of panic and bewilderment. "You won't believe this. We have multiple HFY ships approaching, and their biosignatures are off the charts." Mark's heart hammered in his chest. "Off the charts? What do you mean? Are they aggressive?" "Not exactly," Evelyn said, squinting at her monitor. "They are behaving as if they are in the mating season." Before anyone could process this information, the doors to the lab hissed open, and a figure strode in. It was tall, slender, and breathtakingly beautiful. Her skin shimmered with an intense pinkish-orange glow, like a sunset captured in human form. Glittering Asplum, her large eyes focused solely on Mark, moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. She stopped in front of him, ignoring everyone else in the room. She raised a hand, her 3 delicate fingers gently brushing against his cheek. "You," she declared in a voice that echoed with a strange mix of telepathic and auditory signals, a sound that felt like velvet on his eardrums. "You are the one. My mating call has reached you. You will be my chosen." Mark stood there, gaping, his brain short-circuiting. He glanced around at his colleagues, whose faces were a mixture of shock, awe, and suppressed laughter. Ares was practically choking with silent mirth. Mark stammered, I think there's been a mistake. I'm just a linguist." He tried to step back, but glittering Asplum followed, her eyes never leaving his. "No mistake," she insisted, her skin pulsing with even more intensity, making the room seem warmer. "Your signal was strong. Your compatibility is undeniable. The great cosmic balance demands it." She reached out again, this time gently grabbing his hand. Her touch sent a strange, electric shiver through him. "Compatibility?" Mark repeated, his voice a croak. With all due respect, I can barely match my socks, let alone understand alien mating signals." Glittering Asplum tilted her head, her feather-like sensory organs twitching. "Socks? What is this, sock? Is it a mating ritual? Do humans make offerings of strange fabric objects?" Mark stared at the beautiful alien. It seemed like he just but dialed his way into an intergalactic dating app. And not only that, but he was already being claimed. "This can't be happening," Mark muttered under his breath, his mind racing through a million scenarios, none of them good. "This is a nightmare. A bizarre, neon-colored nightmare." He glanced at Ares again, who just gave him a thumbs up with a massive grin, and a look that practically screamed, "You are so screwed." Glittering Asplum, noticing the other humans looking at her, and seemingly ignoring Mark, turned to the other researchers, and using an incredibly loud telepathic message, screamed, "This man is mine." Mark cringed and closed his eyes, hoping that when he opened them again, this will all just be a bad dream. But it wasn't. The beautiful, pink, alien woman was still holding his hand, ready to take him to the bedroom. The initial shock of Glittering Asplum's declaration had worn off, replaced by a gnawing sense of utter bewilderment for Mark. He found himself in a situation that was simultaneously hilarious and terrifying, like being trapped in a romantic comedy directed by H.R. Giger. The HFY, now identified by the base crew as part of the Crochelot contingent, a name Ares had gleefully coined and that stuck like superglue, had set up a temporary camp near the base. Glittering Asplum, or Asplum as she was quickly nicknamed by the more irreverent researchers, had become a constant, shimmering presence in Mark's life. The first thing Mark had to wrap his head around was the sheer physicality of HFY courting rituals. They had absolutely no concept of personal space. During his breakfast that morning, Asplum was standing so close that he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin. When he had tried to move his chair, she'd simply shifted with him, like a very persistent, very beautiful, and slightly terrifying shadow. "So," she said, her voice still a mesmerizing blend of tones, "tell me of your courtship customs." She then proceeded to touch his face with her 3 fingers. Mark nearly choked on his protein paste. Well, we usually talk. Maybe go for a coffee. Sometimes dinner?" Asplum tilted her head, her iridescent skin flashing through a spectrum of blues and purples. "Talk? Is this some sort of auditory mating dance? And what is this, a coffee? Is it a nutrient liquid? Do you offer it to your potential mates?" "It's a beverage," Mark explained, feeling increasingly ridiculous. "We drink it. Usually hot. And the talking part is where we exchange information. You know, try to understand each other, figure out if we're compatible." He inwardly winced at the word compatible, knowing that Asplum's definition of it probably involved matching skin colors and not shared interests. Asplum pondered this for a moment, her skin shifting into a vibrant green. So, you assess compatibility through sound and ingestion. Fascinating. Tell me, does this ritual involve physical assessment? She then gently, but firmly, grabbed Mark's arm and began to prod it with her fingers, her eyes scanning him intently. Mark squirmed, his face flushing a shade of red that would have made a tomato jealous. Not usually, no. We typically avoid prodding. This is illogical, Asplum replied. How can one determine the quality of a potential mate without physical assessment? Do humans have hidden features we do not see with our vision? As the days went by, Mark found himself subjected to a constant barrage of HFY courting tactics. Asplum would present him with strange, bioluminescent plants she'd collected from the Boo 7 wilderness, which he later discovered were considered aphrodisiacs among her species. She'd attempt to synchronize her feather movements with his, which resulted in several near misses involving flying cutlery, and she'd sing him songs that consisted of high-pitched telepathic frequencies that made his teeth ache. The human researchers, meanwhile, were having a field day. They'd started a betting pool on how long Mark could last before completely losing it. Ares, in particular, seemed to find endless amusement in Mark's predicament. Having fun with your alien bride, buddy? Ares chuckled over the lab's comm system as Mark tried to hide in a supply closet to get some peace. I hear she's been trying to give you a thorough physical. Did she find anything interesting? Shut up, Ares, Mark groaned into his hand. This is not funny. She keeps trying to touch me, and her skin is literally changing colors whenever I try to talk to her. It's like dating a living lava lamp. Well, maybe try to relax a little, Mark. Embrace the alien love. Or at least, pretend to, while you're trying to understand what they want. It could be fascinating from a scientific perspective. It feels more like I'm a lab rat in some bizarre mating experiment. Mark snapped back, frustrated by his inability to escape the situation. He decided to seek out Dr. Reed for advice, hoping she might have some insights. He found her in the biolab, meticulously cataloging HFY plants. Dr. Reed, he said, his voice strained. I need some advice about, the situation with Asplum. Dr. Reed looked up, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Yes, the interspecies courtship. Quite fascinating, isn't it? From a purely scientific perspective, of course. Fascinating? I'm pretty sure I'm about to be physically assessed like a prize-winning cow, Mark replied. Dr. Reed put down her clipboard. All right, Mark, let's talk practicalities. The HFY mating season is a short, intense period. They are driven by instinct and biological imperative, not exactly logical reasoning. Their customs are strange, certainly, but they are, in their own way, perfectly designed to ensure successful reproduction. According to our initial analysis, if they fail to bond during this time, they become incredibly aggressive and volatile. Mark's eyes widened. Aggressive? You mean they might hurt me if I don't participate in whatever twisted mating ritual they have in mind? Well, not hurt you, exactly, Dr. Reed said, avoiding direct eye contact. But their distress signals can be problematic. We've seen some preliminary data on their hormone surges, and it is not pretty. I recommend that you try and cooperate with their rituals, for lack of a better word. Mark felt a cold dread spread through his chest. He was stuck between a rock and a very brightly colored hard place. He had to somehow navigate the absurdities of HFY courtship while simultaneously avoiding being ripped to shreds by a hormonally imbalanced alien. It was clear to him now. He wasn't just a researcher, he was a walking, talking mating experiment. And the experiment had only just begun. He sighed deeply, knowing that the only way to survive this situation was to just go with it, no matter how bizarre it all felt. He knew the situation was completely surreal, but he still found himself with his eyes on Asplum. For some strange reason, he was actually interested to see what this crazy love adventure would bring him. He needed to find out more about the woman who claimed he was her mate, even if he knew that the situation was utterly insane. The weight of Dr. Reed's warning settled heavily on Mark. He wasn't just dealing with an alien with no concept of personal space, he was dealing with a species whose mating season made them capable of turning into intergalactic berserkers. He needed to understand the HFY mating rituals, and fast. He just didn't know how much he would have to participate. His research led him to a deeply concerning, and frankly bizarre, fact: the HFY could only reproduce if their skin colors matched during the peak of their mating season. It was a form of biological compatibility check, an organic mood ring on steroids. And right now, glittering Asplum's skin was cycling through a kaleidoscope of vibrant hues, a visual demand for Mark to reciprocate. She was currently a shimmering blend of orange and yellow, a color palette that Mark found strangely captivating. "Your skin," Asplum said, her voice a low hum of telepathic energy, "it does not change. You do not show me your mating color." She was standing in his room, as if she had just materialized out of thin air, her eyes intensely focused on him. Mark, who had been trying to hide in the corner with a textbook on HFY biology, swallowed hard. "Well, we humans, we don't exactly have skin that shifts. Our mating rituals are much more internal." He felt a blush creep up his neck, remembering a particularly awkward conversation with his mother about the birds and the bees. He was now having to talk about that with an alien that wanted to mate with him. Asplum tilted her head, the feathery appendages near her ears twitching. "Internal? Is this some sort of psychic mating dance? Is this why humans are so illogical? Everything is locked away inside your body?" She moved closer, her touch light as she ran a finger along his arm. "Perhaps I should use my senses to find your mating color." Mark quickly moved away. The thought of being probed by an alien who was in mating season was not how he envisioned his week. "No. No, that's not necessary. I'm working on it, I am." He lied, thinking that he had to find a way to make his skin change colors. If he had to be a weird, color-changing dude, that would be his fate. This led him down a rabbit hole of ridiculous experiments. He consulted the base's biology database, only to discover that humans didn't have the necessary biological mechanisms to change their skin color at will. He tried various techniques, from layering himself in different colored dyes, which just made him look like a toddler's art project gone wrong, to attempting to influence his blood flow with a series of increasingly uncomfortable exercises. He even tried to recreate the HFY mating hormone formula, but after accidentally causing a small explosion in the lab, Dr. Reed wisely confiscated all his chemicals. "Mark, for the love of all that is scientific, what exactly do you think you're doing?" she had asked, her voice tight with exasperation, after she'd seen him covered in pinkish-purple goo. "You look like a rejected Smurf." "Trying to match my skin color to Asplum's, of course," he replied, frustrated. "I need to participate in these bizarre rituals, or else the Crotchelot contingent will go berserk. Don't you understand this is a matter of intergalactic peace? And you believe that making a mess will help you with this issue?" She pointed at his goo-covered face. "Maybe try to talk to her? Rather than trying to become a chameleon." The situation was spiraling out of control. Asplum, becoming increasingly impatient with Mark's lack of color coordination, had started to express her frustration with a series of loud telepathic pronouncements that made the base's electrical system flicker and hum. The other humans were beginning to avoid him as if he had the plague. One afternoon, while trying to figure out the science of color manipulation, Mark found himself in the base's main control room, poring over complex schematics of a malfunctioning energy converter. He theorized that if he could somehow reroute the base's energy flow, he might be able to induce a change in his skin pigmentation through controlled bursts of electromagnetic radiation. It was a long shot, but Mark was running out of options. Of course, being Mark, he accidentally overloaded the system. The lights flickered, the alarms blared, and the entire base plunged into darkness. The power went out completely. "Mark! What the hell did you do?" Ares yelled as he tripped through the dark lab, the emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows. "Did you finally manage to blow us all up?" "I think I might have rerouted the power," Mark muttered, his face illuminated by the faint glow of a datapad. "It was an experiment." "An experiment?" Ares replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, your experiments are always so successful." Suddenly, in the darkness, Mark felt a hand on his arm. "Mark," Asplum's voice whispered, her skin now glowing a soft, bioluminescent pink, "your energy, it is strong." Before Mark could react, she had pulled him into a gentle embrace. The lack of light had created an intimate bubble, and for the first time, Mark felt a genuine connection with her. Her skin felt warm and smooth against his own, and a strange feeling began to bubble up inside him. Not just fear or confusion. It was something else. "Asplum," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I think you're glowing." She pulled back slightly, her eyes intense. "Yes, I am. Your energy, it resonates with mine. The lack of light makes my colors brighter, and I am feeling your warmth through this connection. It is very satisfying." She then proceeded to brush her face against his, causing Mark's brain to nearly shut down. In the darkness, surrounded by the hum of emergency lights and the scent of alien pheromones, Mark realized that he was losing control. He was starting to see her not as a terrifying alien bride, but a beautiful, captivating woman. He was confused, conflicted, and, dare he admit it, a little turned on. This whole thing was completely insane. And it was only getting started. He could feel that the next adventure that he was about to embark on was going to make the previous ones feel normal. The power outage, or rather Mark's experiment, had thrown the research base into a state of temporary chaos. But it also seemed to have accelerated the already bewildering pace of Mark's forced interspecies courtship. The intimate moment in the dark with glittering Asplum had left him reeling, a confusing mix of attraction, fear, and sheer bewilderment swirling in his mind. And it had made the other HFY take notice. The Crochelot contingent had become increasingly agitated. The other HFY females began to view Mark with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He was, after all, the human male who had somehow managed to attract the attention of one of their most sought-after females. And the males, they were clearly not impressed. One morning, as Mark was trying to decipher a new set of HFY communication patterns, which, disappointingly, turned out to be a recipe for a particularly pungent alien soup, a tall, broad-shouldered HFY male approached him. His skin was a deep, shimmering blue, and his feather-like appendages twitched with an air of barely contained aggression. "You," the male said, his voice a low rumble, "you are not of our kind. You have no mating colors. Yet, Asplum claims you as her chosen. This is not acceptable." Mark swallowed nervously. I'm just a researcher. I didn't ask for any of this. It was a miscommunication." The male snorted, a sound that was both guttural and oddly musical. "Miscommunication? You think the universe makes mistakes? You must prove your worth to her. Or, I shall claim her for myself. That's how it is on Crochelot." Mark blinked. "Claim her? As if she is a prize? Maybe you should ask her?" The male ignored his comment. "We will settle this the way we do things on Crochelot. We will duel." Mark's brain short-circuited. Duel? As in, with swords? Or laser guns? Or is it a dance-off? Because I'm terrible at dancing. The male's skin began to pulse with a brighter blue, a visual indicator of rising anger. "We duel in the mating arena. With physical prowess and display of energy." He then gestured to a cleared area outside the base, where the HFY had erected a makeshift arena. The arena was basically a patch of dirt surrounded by a ring of glowing crystals. It looked like a kindergarten art project meets gladiatorial combat. Mark was terrified. He had never been in a fight in his life, unless you counted the occasional heated debate with his roommate about whose turn it was to do the dishes. And now, he was expected to engage in a duel with an alien who looked like he could bench press a small moon. Meanwhile, the other human researchers were glued to the base's monitors, watching the spectacle with a mix of morbid curiosity and morbid amusement. Ares was practically bouncing in his chair, popcorn in hand. "This is going to be epic," he chuckled over the comm system. "Go get M, Tiger." "Show that space dude who's boss." "Ares, if I die, I'm haunting you," Mark muttered, feeling the familiar pang of social anxiety mixing with genuine terror. He walked out of the base, feeling like a lamb being led to the slaughterhouse, the eyes of the other XYLR burning into his back. The duel turned out to be less about physical combat and more about a display of venergy, as the XYLR male had put it. The male began to perform a series of acrobatic feats, leaping and twirling, his body glowing with a vibrant blue light. It was a strange mix of dance and martial arts, like something out of a low-budget sci-fi movie. Mark, however, had no idea what he was supposed to do. He tried a few pathetic jumps, his limbs flailing wildly, looking more like a confused penguin than a warrior. The other XYLR began to snicker, their skin colors shifting to shades of amusement and ridicule. Glittering Asbloom, who was watching from the sidelines, seemed to be both frustrated and strangely intrigued. Her skin pulsed with a mix of orange and pink, and Mark could sense a strong wave of telepathic energy directed at him. It felt like she was trying to tell him something, but he couldn't quite decipher it. In a moment of desperation, Mark did the only thing he could think of. He channeled all his anxiety, his fear, and his desire to impress Asbloom into a single, ridiculous act. He did a cartwheel, followed by a surprisingly decent handstand, which he immediately fell out of. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't powerful, but it was unexpected. The XYLR, including the challenger, stared at him, their skin changing to a collective shade of bewildered purple. Even Ares fell silent for a moment. The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by an almost palpable sense of confusion. "What was that?" the blue male asked, genuinely confused. Before Mark could attempt to reply, a new wave of chaos erupted on the base. Someone had accidentally contaminated the human food supply with a XYLR delicacy, a fermented, glowing paste that had a rather stimulating effect on the human physiology. The base personnel, caught off guard, began experiencing bizarre side effects. Some were uncontrollably giggling, others were suddenly speaking in gibberish, and a few were attempting to dance the Macarena with laboratory equipment. Ares was running around screaming about loving everyone, and Dr. Reed was chasing him, telling him that he was going to die. Mark watched the pandemonium unfold, his earlier fear replaced with a strange sense of resignation. He'd gone from a socially awkward xenolinguist to a contestant in an alien dating competition and now a reluctant hero in a chaotic food poisoning crisis. This was his life now. This was love in the time of intergalactic weirdness. He looked at Asbloom, whose eyes were now wide with a mix of surprise and amusement. For the first time, she actually seemed interested in what he was doing, rather than her mating ritual. He felt a strange urge to protect her from her own people. And he knew that no matter what weird situation this day would bring, he was ready. Mark had come to the realization that he was actually starting to care about her, and more surprisingly, he was ready to defend her. Even if he still had no idea how to show it to the alien that had claimed him as her mate. He had decided that he would try, even if he knew he was going to fail spectacularly. The chaos from the fermented XYLR paste had finally subsided, leaving the research base in a state of slightly nauseated calm. Mark, miraculously, had emerged relatively unscathed, though he was still trying to get the image of Dr. Reed attempting to tango with a robotic arm out of his head. The duel, and its bizarre aftermath, however, had shifted something within him. He had finally accepted the utter absurdity of his situation and, more surprisingly, he had accepted that he was, indeed, attracted to glittering Asbloom. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore, he was genuinely invested in this interspecies romance, as bizarre and illogical as it was. The XYLR Council, observing the events from afar, had decided that Mark, despite his lack of physical prowess and questionable dance moves, was indeed worthy of consideration as a mate for Asbloom. But they weren't about to make things easy. A series of final suitability tests were set in motion, designed to assess his human quirks and how they would fit with the XYLR way of life. The first test involved a complex telepathic puzzle, which Mark, surprisingly, aced with the help of his extensive knowledge of XYLR communication patterns. The second was a physical endurance challenge, where he had to keep up with Asbloom as she scaled a cliff face at dizzying speed. He failed miserably, clinging to the rock face like a very confused koala, but his sheer persistence and refusal to give up seemed to impress the council. The third, and most bizarre test, was a compatibility ceremony, where he had to demonstrate an understanding of HFY emotional expression through interpretive dance. "This is my personal hell," he muttered as he tried to mimic Asplum's graceful movements, his limbs flailing wildly and his face turning a shade of purple that would have made a HFY proud. "It's not that bad, Mark," Ares chuckled from the control room, his face plastered on the monitor screen. "You look like you're trying to dislocate every joint in your body. It's mesmerizing, in a horrifying way." Mark glared at the screen. "If I survive this, I'm going to make you watch bad karaoke every night for a year." Despite the awkwardness, or perhaps because of it, Mark started to understand the real meaning behind the HFY rituals. It wasn't just about physical compatibility or telepathic prowess, it was about genuine connection, about vulnerability, and about accepting each other, flaws and all. And as he stumbled through the interpretive dance, he found himself looking at Asplum not as a bizarre alien, but as a woman who had, somehow, managed to completely upend his life in the most amazing way possible. The final test was the most crucial. The HFY Council demanded a true expression of his feelings, something that had to come not just from his mind, but from his very core. He had to show them, in a way that transcended language and species, why he was worthy of Asplum's love. Mark stood in the middle of the arena, the three sons of the Kepler 186F system casting long, strange shadows around him. He looked at Asplum, her skin shimmering with a mix of pink and orange, her large eyes filled with a mixture of hope and curiosity. He took a deep breath, then he did something no one, least of all himself, ever expected. He didn't perform a complex telepathic message, he didn't do a graceful dance, he didn't try any other weird HFY mating ritual. He simply spoke from the heart, in his own, uniquely awkward human way. "Look, I know this is all insane. I know that I am a mess. And I also know that I don't understand your customs. But, Asplum, since I've met you, my life has become a complete roller coaster. You have completely changed my perspective, you have challenged me, and you have been patient, and kind, and beautiful. And you also think that I am your perfect mate. I can't explain it, but I am actually very happy that you do. So, if you want, I would be more than happy to try to make this work, even if we do speak different languages, or have completely different mating habits. I'm willing to learn." He finished, feeling a wave of vulnerability wash over him, his cheeks flushed. The HFY Council was silent, their skin shifting through shades of thoughtful blues and greens. Then, Asplum stepped forward, her skin glowing a brilliant, radiant pink. She reached out and gently took his hand. "Your words, they are strange. But your intent, your heart, I feel it. You are not like the others, and your willingness to be illogical is very intriguing. I choose you, Mark Olson. My mating season has reached its peak, and I have chosen you to be the one to mate with me." Her telepathic message resonated through the arena and into his mind. Mark closed his eyes for a moment, a sense of relief and genuine happiness washing over him. He had done it. He had survived the intergalactic dating scene, and somehow, he'd found love in the most unlikely of places. The actual mating, he later discovered, involved a complex merging of telepathic and physical energies, with a considerable amount of skin-to-skin contact. It was a bizarre, intimate, and surprisingly beautiful experience, unlike anything he'd ever imagined. The rest of the HFY mating season passed in a blur of shared experiences, awkward moments, and surprisingly tender connections. Mark learned to navigate the nuances of HFY culture, and Asplum, in turn, became fascinated with the peculiarities of human life. They found a way to communicate on a deeper level, combining the best parts of both cultures, creating a bridge between two worlds. As the HFY prepared to depart, Mark found himself standing next to Asplum, watching their ship rise into the stardusted sky. "Will you come back?" he asked, his voice a mix of hope and uncertainty. Asplum turned to him, her skin shimmering with a warm orange glow. "This connection, it is not temporary. Our bond is strong. I will return, and perhaps, one day, you will visit Crochelot. Maybe you'll even enjoy licking our shiny rocks. Mark chuckled, shaking his head. Maybe. But no more butt dialing, okay? For the sake of intergalactic peace. Bloom smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made Mark's heart skip a beat. She pressed a gentle kiss against his cheek. Never, she whispered telepathically, and she stepped into the spaceship, leaving Mark alone, but not lonely, on the dusty plains of Boo 7. He knew that this was only the beginning of his utterly bizarre and amazing adventure. He had not just accidentally but dialed an alien bride, he had but dialed his way into love. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. He knew now that he was more than capable of love. And that love can make even the most awkward xenolinguist grow into a man.